Welcome back to the Opposition Podcast, number 34, because Rukshan never remembers. I had to go and search it up. How you going, Rukshan?
I'm doing good, man. Good to be on. Yep, Opposition Podcast number 34.
Now,
And today's going to be interesting because everything that's going on and the topic that we're discussing, it's all interlinked, and everyone's kind of caught up in this debate as well online, from politicians to people on social media. So it should be quite interesting with the guest that we have today, actually, to break some of this down and discuss the different ways that Australians can maybe challenge some of this.
So let's just, before we introduce the guest, who I imagine most of our audience already know, just to remember, guys, we're starting on all the platforms, and then at the end we move over to the opposition.show, where you guys can call in. We're only going to have a couple minutes tonight because I do have a report that I need to get out tonight, so there's still a video coming out on Rebel News. But we'll stick around for the Rebel News Plus subscribers. So those of you that go to the opposition.show, subscribe, become a member, support our work by becoming a member. It's $8 a month and you get full access. And I thank everyone that's joined in the last couple of weeks. You get full access to all the Rebel News shows, including my Tuesday night show. This show, you get to call in on this show, and you get access to all the documentaries, and you're just getting to support us. But let's not waste any time. Let's invite our guest here, Mr. Ruddick. How are you doing, mate?
Good evening, gentlemen. Very nice to see you. Thanks for having me on. We've just finished a week in the New South Wales Parliament, fighting the fight for freedom and doing everything we can.
Well, you told us about that. How has this week been in Parliament? It's been a wild, I guess, at least the last day or so has been pretty crazy in New South Wales. Everybody's talking about New South Wales, not only around Australia, but around the world. How's it been? And in a moment, that's kind of how we're going to open up, watching your video. But how's it been on the ground being in Parliament, especially the last couple of days?
Oh, well, look, it was sort of hit mid-morning yesterday. Everyone was gobsmacked. Look, I can tell you, for the first half hour, I was saying to people, have you seen this video? And 3 or 4 people said to me, it can't be true. It's got to be fake. I said, look, it's not fake, because the minister's just come out and said they're never going to work in the public health system again. So, look, it has been the topic of conversation. It's all dreadfully sad. Look, maybe not everyone on this podcast is going to agree with what I'm going to say, but I have a degree of sympathy for these kids. They actually look to me like, look, they've got Aussie accents. They look like they're sort of, brought up, fairly well, in terms of, like, they look healthy. Okay, they look like they've gone and got their nursing degree. They're being productive citizens. But the point I was making in Parliament yesterday is that these kids are victims of a culture where they have grown up since they were babies. Everybody they know talks like this. Okay, and that's the really alarming part about it. And the fact that they were saying these horrible, it just couldn't be worse what they were saying. But they were saying it with no inhibition. They were saying it on a public viewing platform. And this is clearly, we have people in Australia, a not insignificant amount of people, who have grown up with this, pervasive anti-Semitic culture. And I think it's really been shocking. And I tell you who I believe is probably pretty seriously shocked, all the champions of multiculturalism, over the last 50 years. Now, America has always said that we're a melting pot, okay? Now, Australia should be a melting pot. If somebody wants to leave their country and come and live in Australia, they are effectively saying Australia's a better country than the one I currently live in. That's what they're saying. And they're also saying that they want to dedicate their life to make Australia better. They want to pay taxes in Australia. They want to do productive things in Australia, not in their homeland. So I'm thinking, look, if people want to come to Australia, fabulous. And let's have hardworking people. Let's have entrepreneurial people who are going to be a value add to Australia. But and look, my wife's from China. My mum's a Kiwi, and they are both people who still have affection for their homeland. But they've dedicated their life to Australia. So I think it's okay for people to still be affectionate to the country that they might have a connection with. But their life is they're paying taxes in Australia. They're trying to make Australia better. So I reject multiculturalism. It should be a melting pot. It should be the dominant culture should be the Australian culture.
I totally agree.
Yeah, likewise.
The only thing I disagree with, there's no way that I'm going to call those people a victim. I understand, but you're still a grown adult. And I agree with you that they've grown up obviously in a community, and I think that's part of the problem. I just watched a Sky News interview from the streets of Bankstown where somebody's like 100% agree. Yeah, no, there's nothing that they said that was even wrong, because the thing that many I worked in Bankstown back in the day, back before
All right.
people knew who I was. I probably couldn't walk there freely these days, but back when I was a kid, and so I saw it. I know what it's like, and I know how they talk when they think nobody's listening. This is normal conversation there, and yes, not just in the street with their friends or whatever, even in the hospital. That is a conversation that people have. That's the way people talk, and they're so brazen about it that to them it's a bit of a shock that the outside world got to see it. It was the silent part. It's the part that they normally say they keep quiet, that that the rest of the world got to kind of see. And it is sad. And I do agree with you. I think that if people come to Australia, it doesn't matter from where in the world, they should embrace our way of life here. And if you come from a country that escaped a terrorist organization, you came here as a refugee to escape a terrorist organization, then you should certainly not bring that culture and attitude here. Let's watch your reaction.
Another thing is, Avi, that at least one of these people is from Afghanistan, and
Yes.
their parents were boat people, or they were boat people as a kid, or whatever. Now, I remember when the Americans went into Afghanistan in 2001. There was a bit of a media thing at the time that they found the last remaining Jew in Kabul. Okay, there was a synagogue in Kabul, and there was one or two Jews left, and they were interviewed. Okay, so my point is, that Afghan guy at least has probably never met a Jew in his life, because he wouldn't have met them in Afghanistan, and I don't think there's many Jewish people at Bankstown.
No.
So it's all like this.
I think I was the last one.
You probably sounds like you were. It's all like this myth that it's not the real world. Now, when I say I do have some sympathy for them, but I would also say, which will sound contradictory, yesterday the health minister said that they've been stood down. Okay, good. And now we've heard that they're never going to work for New South Wales Health ever again. Okay, good. But I mean, what I haven't worked out, what I can't work out is, why haven't they been arrested? Because they did both say on video, they said not only that they will kill Israelis, they said that they have killed Israelis. Now, I don't believe they have, but there's a 10% chance they have. They have admitted publicly to a capital crime. Okay, well, now I think they made it up. That's what I believe. But I could be wrong.
I agree with you. Even if you look at the facts, like how many Israelis are going to Bankstown Hospital, I think the numbers are, especially ones that are going to promote that they're Israeli or Jewish. I don't think there's many. So I think that the chances of them even crossing one would be quite slim. And then the one that they crossed that they killed, I do agree with you. But yes, if somebody admits to a capital crime, they should at least be arrested and investigated. And you know what? What's also a crime is falsely impersonating a doctor.
I mean, yeah. Well, that was a shocking thing. Before we get to the video, like the fact that they were so comfortable in their workplace. This is not like a private conversation at a house or something like this. They're literally doing this at work in the uniform of a New South Wales health worker, saying these things about killing patients and that they have killed patients. The comfort levels to be able to say that in the workplace shows you that this perhaps is more of a cultural issue within the workplace itself as well. It might be normal conversation that they have amongst their other colleagues as well. So those things need to be looked into as well, because it shows you that. I think there was a video that came out, Avi, I don't know if you've seen, of another nurse or a doctor saying that they've raised this issue before.
Yeah, so I've got exactly. I've got my report coming out in about half an hour.
You got that video,
minutes.
Yeah. So it's just a more of a deep issue that we're seeing to the surface because of this. This guy from Israel that ended up on this chat app. We've been able to see into this window that we otherwise wouldn't see, and it is quite shocking. I think a lot of people might already know that this is the case, but to actually see it and to actually see people say it so calmly that they're going to kill people is quite shocking for an Australian to hear, and especially people that have grown up with Australian values to be saying that, well, apparently grown up with Australian values. So it's quite shocking.
I think this is a perfect segue.
I've just got a quick question. part of this video that the world has seen is beeped out.
I want to
Has
know what she said.
anybody seen the unbeeped version?
No.
I believe Shari Barrack, what's her name, Shari from
Markson.
Sky News. She has the original, and I believe perhaps the police might have access to that as well. So that must. I don't know
Apparently,
what
he's
she says
agreed to
there.
give it to the police as part of their investigation. I have ABC News running all day because I like to know what they're saying about us. And they've made a point to say that he hasn't given it to police yet. I don't know how they would know that. I think they're just wishing that it is all a setup. And I know that is the that's the way it's been framed, and that's the narrative, especially in the Islamic community. I can see, it's unfairly edited. I don't know about you. There is no way. I've been in many conversations in my life with a lot of people, and there's no way you're going to edit me, going, I'm killing people and I've done it and I'm going to do it again. There's no way to unfairly edit that. There's no one that can set me up to accidentally say that, especially when, like you say, Rukshan, these people were sitting there in their job, which their job was to care for people at the time that they should have been caring for people. And from the comments on my own videos and the emails that I've received in the last 24 hours, because we started a petition, we got, I think, almost 30,000 people signed it already. That people are saying, well, it's not just Jews that they don't like in Bankstown Hospital. I'm an Aussie and I've had some really bad experiences that I tried to get the media interested and made complaints, official complaints, and they would not listen to. But like I said, all of that's going to come. I've got a story coming out after we finish this. This is a good segue from this into the free speech discussion. Let's watch your reaction here. I'll make it a little bit faster so we can skip to it because you talk too slow, mate.
Mr. President, I rise to support the motion. Anti-Semitism is a medieval curse, and we do not want it establishing itself here in Australia. In 1981, the American President Ronald Reagan was shot and rushed to hospital. On the operating table, Reagan quipped, "I hope you're all Republicans," to which the chief surgeon, a registered Democrat, replied, "Mr. President, we are all Republicans today." Now, of course, we all expect complete impartiality in our healthcare system, particularly a public healthcare system. But today, Australia is in shock to learn that nurses at a Sydney hospital are openly bragging about not only wanting to kill Jewish patients, but that they already have. I understand the nurses have been stood down, but what is most disturbing is that these nurses, who otherwise seem like very normal young Aussies, are so casual in their extreme anti-Semitism. They had no inhibitions talking like this, even on a public viewing platform. The whole thing is shocking. I can only conclude, Mr. President, that these nurses come from a culture where people routinely talk like this. It is incorrect to suggest that the shocking spike in anti-Semitic behaviour is due to the current conflict in the Middle East. There have been multiple Arab-Israeli conflicts for decades, and none of them saw a rise in public anti-Semitism in Australia, but this one has. What's different? Our immigration program has by and large been good, though I am personally in favour of a 5-year general pause. But more specifically, if we grant visas to people who are from a culture with pervasive anti-Semitism, should we be surprised to see a sharp rise in anti-Semitism? Mr. Speaker, we do not need new hate speech laws that I fear long-term will only fuel this problem. More than anything else, this is further evidence that we need a 5-year immigration pause, and we need to completely overhaul our immigration program so that the free market determines which skills we need, and that we select for migrants who come from cultures where anti-Semitism and other malign values are not a feature. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honourable Mark Latham.
I rise in support of what the Honourable John Ruddick has just said. One of the hardest things in politics is to accept the limits of government and parliamentary power. And in the case of anti-Semitism and these problems that have come to Australia essentially out of the Middle East, we are dealing with hatreds that are ingrained and clearly a part of the existence of these people for thousands of years. Thousands of years. And the idea we're going to roll that back with some protest laws in front of a synagogue, or some tougher penalties for graffiti, or we're going to try and define hate speech and the incitement to hatred, really, it doesn't understand the extent of the problem. And that stuff out of Bankstown Hospital today, do you think we've got the power of a parliament and a government to wind back those hatreds, which are clearly integral to the existence of those two nurses? It is contrary to every principle of a civilised society. It's frightening. It's frightening to think that the people in Bankstown and southwest Sydney might have to use that hospital could be treated that way. It is absolutely horrific.
I, by and large, agree with the contributions, except that I would put a caveat on the last two contributions from the Honourable John Ruddick and the Honourable Mark Latham. I'm not saying their contributions, I dismiss their contributions out of hand, but I do take exception, and that is this, is that if people think that the source of this problem is Australia's immigration program, then they are, I think, sorely mistaken. The reason this society is so great and is so progressive and so open-minded is because of our immigration program, but more importantly, the Whitlam-Grasby concept of multiculturalism, which is not that you import people for an economic value or to assimilate, is that you bring people here because it gives, one of the value adds is that it gives your domestic population a different perspective on what it means to be a human being and have different experiences from different cultures. Now, if the proposition is that we put up the shutters and to hell with multiculturalism because we're importing hatred, I think that's a very zero-sum, bipolar assessment of the situation.
Yeah.
That was the first time I actually got to watch the full thing through. I've got to say I agreed with you 100%. Mark Latham 95%. And who's this guy?
He's like a sort of a middle-ranking minister in the Minns government. He's a Labor left. His name's Mark Ruddick. Look, he's a serious trade union hack his whole life. Okay, look, he's not a bad bloke, but I mean, I just couldn't believe what he said there. I mean, he says multiculturalism or immigration programs should not be about an economic impact on Australia or a cultural assimilation. It should be so that Australians can learn about other cultures, okay, and get a different perspective. Well, no. It is about economics. We want to bring people into this country who are going to help make Australia a bigger cake, a bigger Australia. And we also want them to culturally assimilate. Now, look, sometimes people come to this country from countries which have nothing in common with Australian culture, but they sort of like, let's take Japan. Let's take Japan. Japan and Australia, very different. But Japanese people come here and they barely get any welfare. They don't end up in jails. So it's not. We're not saying we only want people from Europe, okay? And people from Brazil. They don't. That's more in common with Australia. But people from Sri Lanka, okay? People from Israel. Most migrants to this country have been pretty good, okay, and have made Australia a richer place, okay. But
are you sure about Sri Lankans though?
Well, they love cricket. I
don't agree with that guy. I don't agree with that guy about you wanting to import different perspectives, like the perspective of whatever those nurses were sharing. That is a common thing in that part of the world. Exactly. So we should be blocking those type of things from coming. And if they are being brought into this country, then we should be encouraging 100% assimilation into the Australian way of life, which is that we reject the idea of nurses saying very openly that they will kill people because they disagree with them on an ethnic level because of something that's happening overseas. Like, we can't have that here. So we don't need those perspectives. And I think that guy's a part of the problem. Like, over decades and decades, people have tried to water down the issue of immigration into those type of arguments about. Well, that's the first time I've actually heard someone say it. Even that sounds like lunacy. Sorry, that just caught me off guard listening to that guy.
I was expecting a third person to, make your point in a different way, like you kind of had with Mark Latham. But then you had this guy that's basically, literally the whole problem is this, that we're bringing in people that their entire existence hates another person just for who they are, based on nothing else but their race and their religion, their ethnicity. So there's nothing you can do to fix that. It's not another perspective. What do you want to bring? Another perspective. So I understand that you hate me. I know you hate me. And that's why I don't want to live where you hate me. The whole Middle East, you look at what happens, you look at the history of the Middle East, not just about Israel, but you look at how it was colonized by the Islamic thing, is because you brought people in who had a different perspective, and then when their perspective became powerful enough, they took over your perspective. And that's what would happen here, is if you give too much power to people that have an opposing worldview, a completely opposing culture, that don't actually believe in your freedom and democracy, then one day, like they always say, first they start with the Saturday people, then they go to Sunday people. First they'll just pick on the smallest minority, the people that can least defend themselves. But once they get powerful enough, they're turning on you. These are the same people that just don't, the same ideology, hates Australia as well.
But even not even going that hardcore, Avi, like if you look at Great Britain, for instance,
Sure.
you're seeing that, decades ahead of Australia in terms of how bad importing different perspectives has become.
I like that. That's the way that's a
like
euphemism
that is the
now
ultimate
that we can say.
example of importing different perspectives. Great Britain is completely out of control, and you have these groups who have not integrated whatsoever. They have complete leverage over the society, and there's almost nothing that can be done to turn it back. So that's what happens when you have unchecked perspective immigration, and we don't want to go down that path. So these issues really making this a debate right now, I think, is important in our society, because we can really tighten the screws around immigration and get rid of this perspective style immigration policies that these people are talking about.
No, I didn't want
it can happen quickly. We all know what's happening in France and Britain and Germany. There's a European country that when I was growing up, the left wingers told me was the perfect country, democratic socialist. Sweden. Okay. Now, Sweden very quickly has turned into a war zone. Beautiful Sweden, the land of ABBA. Okay. We always thought of Sweden as sort of almost like this utopia. Okay. Now, when silly Angela Merkel said, "Oh yeah, come in, all you Syrian refugees, just walk in, and we'll give you Germany." Well, Sweden did the same thing. Now, I was in Brussels just a week ago. That there's been 30 bombings in Sweden this year. This year's only just started a few weeks ago. 30 bombings, and you know what? The media is not talking about it because we all know who's behind it. Now, Australian 60 Minutes, they went to Sweden a couple of years ago to see what it's like. And the camera crew got bashed up. There's all these no-go zones there. So what's been happening in England is it's been sort of it's been building up to it over decades. But it can happen. Look, gentlemen, I can tell you what. The older I get, I'm a pretty radical libertarian. Okay, I am increasingly of the view the most important policy is immigration. Okay, because if you get the immigration right, it makes your country stronger and safer and better. If you get your immigration wrong, it's very hard to reverse. Okay? And now, look, if you put your taxes up too high or you put your regulations up too high, that's bad. But we can fix that up. We can change the tax rates, okay? It's not good. But with the immigration, if you look at what's Sweden going to do with these people? Now, people are talking. I was at this Make Europe Great Again conference in Brussels, and a lot of people were talking about deportation. Do you know how messy deportation is? Do you know how inhumane deportation is? Now, I'm not saying that we've got to rule it out, but I mean, what I am saying is we've got to try to avoid having the problem in the first place where deportation is an option, okay?
Agreed with you. Now, go on.
No, I was going to say it kind of rolls into this issue where
exactly this is
the impacts of immigration and the changes now we're seeing in Australian society overall that impacts everyone, which is around free speech and these hate speech, this legislation. I think the first one was the federal legislation that was passed.
Sure.
That was kind of if you pull that up.
Yeah, I will. And but I guess we can go off the video first where Latham makes a point that... So I think Latham makes the right point. And I often feel like the government is using these situations to push through their agenda, which has always been about controlling speech. That's the first thing they want to do. But there's different points. Like, I don't know how you feel about this, the stopping them from rallying outside synagogues. That one, I don't think that's a free speech thing. I think that's a different issue. I think there should be no, we already have laws around speech when it comes to incitement to violence, threats to kill, defamation. There's already systems in place. That aside from that, I don't think we need anything. As hurtful as it is, as somebody that's witnessed some of the nonsense that's gone on since October 7 and as hurtful as it can be, I don't think legislating it, blasphemy laws, I don't think those work. And I think it just sends it underground. I personally prefer seeing and hearing those two nurses than it just being on the streets of Bankstown and Lakemba before it's too late. That's what's going to happen. Everybody's shocked around the world about what these nurses said, but that's because we don't get to hear it. I want to hear what they're saying there, and pushing it underground is unhelpful. However, I do want to say that when it comes to protecting places of worship, just because I've witnessed it, I do think that either you've got to enforce, so police have to, if there's going to be a protest, for example, in Sydney. So this is the difference between Sydney and Melbourne. In Sydney, we saw they're doing protests outside the synagogue in the city. And then what's happening is when a Jew comes to the synagogue, because they're outnumbered 100-1, so the police find the easier thing is to move the Jew on, even though he's going into an event in the synagogue. So I think that in that case, I think police at minimum, the bare minimum has to be that they uphold the right of the individual to go to his place of worship. Now, in Melbourne, we're seeing those protests come into the Jewish residential area and basically bring the protest to the Jews, to their place of worship. So in that situation, I do think that there is, and we've had laws. That's the thing, that we have very ancient laws, like 100-year-old laws about disturbing places of worship that are just not being enforced. We don't need new laws. We just need the old laws enforced, and no more caps on freedom of speech. But tell us what you think about those two specific issues and what Latham himself said.
Okay. Well, look, I asked somebody in the government yesterday, I said, look, in terms of this thing about making it illegal to have a protest at the front of a place of worship, and we all know there's only one type of place of worship where they'll protest, how often is this happening? Now, he seemed fairly confident that it only happened once in Sydney, at the front of the Grand Synagogue. I could be wrong, he could be wrong, okay, but I can't recall seeing it. That's why I asked him, because is this actually a problem? Now, what I'm going to be doing is, look, out of what Chris Minns has proposed, which will be coming to the Parliament next week.
That's the New South Wales one, so we're going to get onto that, but yeah.
Sorry, yes. There's sort of three tranches, and the first two have been tabled. Now, the first one is what you're referring to, Avi, which is, giving the police the right to, or just saying you can't have a protest at the front of a place of worship. Okay, now look, what I'm going to do, these laws are going to get through. Liberal and Labor, it's just like in Canberra, Liberal and Labor are going to agree to it, but still gives us an opportunity. As a libertarian, I'm pretty much a free speech absolutist, and at a public protest is a form of free speech. And the three people on this...
Are you okay with them protesting outside your house? Like if outside people's private houses?
Well, no.
So what's the difference? Free speech absolutist? I don't get what the difference is.
Well, I don't think, look, is this an ongoing problem? Now, I don't believe it is, Arby.
I understand that. I understand. I'm just questioning.
We don't want laws just because the law sounds nice. Okay?
I agree with you, and I don't necessarily think in Sydney, if it's happened once, that you necessarily need a law. Even in Melbourne, I don't necessarily think you need a law. You just need proper policing in the case that it happens, although there becomes this problem like we've seen in Victoria, where there's a protest every single week and we literally can't afford to keep it up. These people are not going away. They've brought their conflict to Australia. So what do you do to, firstly, every taxpayer is funding this crap. So what do you do, one, to protect people who are going to their places of worship? In Sydney, it's happened once. In Victoria, it's happening all the time. And
okay.
And two,
what I'm proposing is a sunset clause, an amendment. I'm going to propose an amendment which says that if this law passes, which it's going to pass, then it will expire after 12 months. Now then, if we think after 12 months that we need this law more permanently, well, we can reassess then. Now, let's say there used to be protests.
I think every law should have that, though. I think every law.
Well, I agree with that. Now, but there used to be protests out the front of Catholic churches about child abuse, and then there used to be protests out the front of Catholic churches about the Catholics being anti the rainbow movement. Okay. Now they were, a lot of Catholic parishioners didn't like it very much. Okay, and I probably didn't like it very much. But then the question is, do we want to use the state? Now, remember, the state is backed up by the threat of violence. Okay, so we do want to. And look, who knows what's going to happen? There might be some scandal in some religious denomination in the next 20 years, and maybe a protest is a valid protest. So on terms of that one, look, that's the least offensive thing that Chris Minns has proposed. But Avi, you mentioned about, I was in Melbourne, a few months ago. In the middle of Saturday, I'm walking down the main street. Yeah, there's a massive protest going on. Okay, now and I don't like it. Okay, now I say, and we'll probably disagree on this one. What the alternative is that we get the police out and we say you're not allowed to protest. Now I know it's an inconvenience.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
Okay. Well, what we're going to have is, I say, if people want to have a public protest, we might hate their cause. We have to let them have their public protest, because the alternative is we get the police out with the bludgeon, hit them, say go home, you're not allowed. It's too ugly. So we should have the right to protest. And the three people on this conversation, we know a thing or two about attending a public protest when we're cranky at the government. And a lot of people were very angry at us for protesting against COVID.
The right to protest. Yeah, but the right to protest is fine. But I think the problem we're seeing in Victoria is the rights of other people to enjoy the city or their lives is not being respected as well. There's no balance there.
So the right to protest. So if you compare it to the COVID protest, for example, the whole city was shut down. So you couldn't make the argument that they were disrupting people's ability to go about anything, because they were literally doing the opposite. They were
you can make the argument, though, that the people that were protesting, this is the argument they made, that people who were protesting was putting the community in danger by spreading COVID.
Sure, that's a separate. I'm making.
There's always an argument against it.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, in the COVID, the problem that we have now is that they're literally shutting down parts of the city every single week. When I say go ahead and protest, but don't stop everyone from coming into the city. So as in, mark a spot that you're going to protest, let the police set it up, work it out. That's fine. Let them uphold. It literally says it on the thing of Victoria Police, uphold the right. They will uphold your right to do it. Just make sure that
you have in New South Wales. Yeah,
I think that's what they have in New South Wales. They don't have that
system, right?
And that way also police can ensure the safety of people that are coming to the city and the ability to get around. That's what we've suffered with for 15 months. I absolutely agree with you that we cannot stop people's right to protest. It is a fundamental a necessity in a democracy to have that right. But there is also a way to go about it to ensure that, and also I think we need to take the lessons. Look what we have rallying here every week. It goes back to the immigration problem. You've imported so many people that not only hate another country on the other side of the world, but they're targeting and they hate other Australians and Australia itself. They're at all these rallies, you're seeing them rally, and there's not one Australian flag, because they the same arguments that they're making against Israel, they're making also against Australia, and they're waving the Aboriginal flag and the Palestinian flag, because to them it's the same fight.
Well, the purpose of having a public protest is to change the opinions of government decision makers and the public in general. Now, from what I can see in Melbourne, where I wanted to cross the road and I couldn't, I think it was an inconvenience for 15 minutes. Not great on a busy Saturday, but it's not the end of the world. But anyway, they are protesting because they want to change public opinion and political leaders.
Did they convince
mainly
you?
Public opinion. Is it working? I don't believe it's working. Look at the Paran by-election last weekend.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe the result of that. I believe that the Greens have gone way too far with look, they I don't know. I guess they're similar to what they'd be in Victoria. They are in New South Wales. They can't shut up about Hamas. Okay, they're all over Hamas. Okay, and I sort of admire their consistency. You would have thought for political reasons they might have shut it up a bit, but there has been a swing. Look at the Queensland state election. The Greens lost seats. They've lost. I'm not sure quite how to pronounce it. Paran, I think. But and I think that the Greens are not going to go great at the next federal election. So these protests that they're having are detrimental to their cause.
Sure, you're right. I do agree with that. The question is how we manage it. But I think let's move on to the federal thing, just because we don't have that much time left. I don't know if you know much about it. Obviously, you're a state MP, but the federal government rushed this through, and it was supported by both sides of Parliament. I think even One Nation abstained in this one.
Yeah, they abstained.
See, look, I'm reading this, and it's like it's got a bunch of stuff that's a bit scary. The one thing I agree on it is that minimum mandatory sentences for terrorism offences. Aside from that, some of it looks pretty worrying.
I
What
think
does it say?
it was the interpretation of a violent act, so it kind of broadens the scope of what, just the mere act of saying something that could potentially be construed as violence against a group, could, even if you're not committing the act of violence itself, it could be a form of hate speech because you're kind of alluding to something that could be. It's very kind of vague. I think what is one of the major issues that people have.
The bill targets
one
the
of the key
most serious
components to it.
forms of harmful hate speech, namely advocating and threatening the use of force or violence against a group of member or a group against a place of worship. Like, it is vague. It's worrying.
And look, the thing is, right? So there's existing laws. That's what the biggest argument is against it, and it does look like we can't. If you've been paying attention at all to anything that's been going on, that this is just the government, playing this game where they're trying to look like they're doing something for a problem that they've caused themselves by not acting on it sooner enough.
Well,
both the sides
not
of government,
enforcing
Liberal and
current
Labor,
laws.
yeah, and they're both sides of government, Labor and Liberal. They're trying to outdo each other in terms of how hard they go on this. So it's problematic, and we're not going to get this overturned by the new government that's going to come in if Pete Dutton wins. It's not going to happen like in that way. So this is here to stay, and it's going to have to be challenged in the courts or overturned over a long period of time by other politicians or minor parties or libertarians, whoever gets in. And there's got to be a lot of work to be done until this is actually like tested. Even we don't really know what this will do, and I think that's why people are worried, because it's unknown. And we've seen the government over a period of time try to introduce this misinformation, disinformation, and all these other ways of controlling speech, and they've found a way, perhaps, amongst themselves, to kind of rush something through that has almost the same intended effect. Because I'm seeing people online now saying they're not sure how to talk about issues. They're afraid to say things that they want to say because they feel like they're going to be targeted. And we shouldn't live in a society like that, most definitely.
Well, look, do you remember way before October the 7th? I think Dan Andrews introduced a ban on public displays of the swastika. Now, everybody on the political spectrum in Australia at the time said, oh, well, yeah, we all believe in free speech, but yeah, we can make an exception for the swastika. I mean, we have to ban that.
I advocated against that.
Oh, good to know. I was going to ask where you two gentlemen are on that. Okay, good. Well, you've been vindicated, because the Libertarians and you gentlemen at the time said, hang on. This will be a slippery slope. The state will think, okay, once we've got this thing in where we can ban this symbol, well, and most of the public would have thought, oh, well, this is just a one-off for an extraordinarily, a one-off situation, the swastika. But and One Nation, my party is very friendly with One Nation, but Pauline and One Nation voted in favour of the swastika bans, okay? But the Libertarians were the lone voice out there saying, no, don't do it, because it's a slippery slope. And the other thing is, look, I'm 53, I'm 54. I can't even remember seeing a swastika on display in Australia, okay? And I've moved around in a few different circles. It's not like it was a problem. It's not like you would. And if anyone ever put a flagpole up in their front yard and put a swastika up there,
ironically, since the legislation, it's been more of a problem.
Yeah, I bet that's the case. Yes, that would be right. Okay. But I mean, if somebody ever put a swastika on their flagpole, okay, well, the Libertarian would say they are legally able to do that. Okay, it's not going to, their neighbours aren't going to be real happy because it's going to decrease property values. But you know what's going to happen to the homeowner who puts the swastika up? They're going to get a brick through the window at some point, aren't they? Okay, someone's going to take vigilante action against it. They're inviting trouble. So it was a non-problem, but it was the thin edge of the wedge, because the left lusts the power to suppress our speech. Now, you hear what they say at Davos. They say the biggest issue in the world in the next 2 years is misinformation and disinformation. They're obsessed with it. The left have got all this power at the moment, and thank God for Elon Musk exposing all their dodgy stuff with the Doge. All these people getting all the gravy train, and they want to keep it going, and they hate free speech. And this is why the magnificent American founding fathers when they put in their Bill of Rights. What's at the very top of the list of the Bill of Rights? The Congress shall have no power to abridge the people's right to free speech. Thank God for the American founding fathers. And we tried to move an amendment to the New South Wales Constitution last year. Cut and paste of the American First Amendment. Wasn't successful, but we're going to keep fighting for it. And if we get some federal senators elected in the next coming months, that'll be one of the first things they do, I expect, which is an amendment to. And you know what? It's very hard to get constitutional reform in this country, which is good. We don't want people meddling with the Constitution. But I bet that if the Australian people are asked in a referendum, do you want to change the Constitution to enshrine the right to free speech? That Constitution, gentlemen, that referendum will win.
Yeah. And the slippery slope argument I was making, even I remember when Dan Andrews was trying to do it, I did a radio interview, and I remember even making the argument to friends in the Jewish community, because obviously it's a sensitive issue. And I found a lot of people agreed with me at the time. And I was saying, listen, today we banned the swastika, which is just a bunch of loony nutters on the fringe of society that I frankly prefer to know who they are, that everybody, most of the world looks at and knows it as a symbol of hate, and most people are disgusted by it. But you can fight for a law that will have that ban. But one day, when the Greens have too much power in the state, you know what they're going to ban? The Israeli flag. They're going to say that's a symbol of hate. So if you open that door, that Pandora's box, be prepared for it to come back at you. I think that's why I've always argued that, as uncomfortable as it is, and I can tell you since October 7, as a Jew in Australia, it's been uncomfortable at times. But the only time I want the government to get involved is when it is as an incitement to violence. And there has been plenty of that. And there is plenty of legislation to deal with that. When it has been threats to harm or kill, there's been plenty of that. And there's plenty of legislation for that. And the police have let that slide. And again, when it comes to the issue of taking the protests to Jewish communities, to outside synagogues, I think there is something we have to do to ensure that people, just like you don't want protests outside the front of your house, in Melbourne at least, when they were taking the protests to the Jewish community, you're taking it to people's residential homes where it is all visibly Jewish. I think that there is room for something. Beyond that, I think that, we should uphold the right for the Palestinian protests to expose themselves for the haters that they are.
But that circles back to the whole issue that we had with immigration, right? So typically within, Western culture, you wouldn't normally, over a disagreement about something, go to a place of worship to protest. It would kind of be something that you wouldn't do out of respect, because you don't want to go to a religious place and, target people who are going to worship, because we value the freedom of religion and the right for people to worship in peace. And you did make some exceptions there where people went gone because of child sexual abuse and stuff. So there are instances where that can happen. But normally we wouldn't have to even have this type of conversation. But it is because of these kind of different cultures that have now arrived here. Those boundaries no longer exist. Protesting at a synagogue is seen as right because, we have to stop these people any way possible, and everything can go out the window. So we can go protest at a synagogue. And I understand from a governmental level and a policing level, it might be challenging for them to actually deal with that without causing even more racial tension and more harm within society. So they just go for the easy route of just banning it for everyone. So these laws that we would have never had to have in this country, we all of a sudden have to have because of other cultures refusing to assimilate and live by our standards and our values. And I think the government, the politicians, Anthony Albanese, for instance, he wants to get the Muslim vote. He wants to get certain demographics in New South Wales, for instance, voting for him. And he's not been managed to stand up. Western Sydney. He's not managed to stand up. When this first happened, like a couple of days after October 7th, that's when the government should have acted. Months and years on, they've had to introduce these new laws, and it's ridiculous because the rest of us who don't believe in these things, I would never think about going to a religious place to protest in front of it. Like, that just doesn't make sense. Like, you would not do that. So these people, obviously, who are doing this have no respect whatsoever for the Australian way of life. And it's unfortunate that we're finding ourselves in this situation. And it's so hard, I think, to reverse it because of, there's very little pushing towards assimilation within society.
Well, I consider all these, the federal, the state laws, let's call them in general, the hate speech laws. They're a band-aid, but they're worse than a band-aid. So let's say you've got a festering sore on your hand, and you put a band-aid on it, okay, and you leave that there for a week. It's going to make things worse. Now this is why I think long-term these laws will make things worse, okay, because we should be trying to change how people's hearts, okay, through persuasion. Okay, the best way to confront hate speech is good speech. But what'll happen? These laws are going to be the laws of the land. Okay, so we hopefully we can reverse them. But this is what I fear is going to happen over the long term. The type of people that get attracted to either neo-Nazi stuff or jihadi stuff are very typically young men between the ages of about 15 and 25. And for whatever reason, they might have a unhappy life, broken family, whatever. Maybe they've got no personality. Okay. And they can be groomed into becoming a jihadi or a neo-Nazi. Now, a way that when they sort of become adjacent to these movements and someone's trying to get them more involved, the type of thing they will say to them is, look, we are a persecuted minority. The state, the government, the Victorian government, the Australian government, the New South Wales government, they make laws specifically about us, okay? And some of these people are going to think, wow, well, we must be right. We've got the whole world's infrastructure and power against us. And some of them, not many, but some of them will say, well, you must be right. I'm going to join this crusade. And now, if we did, now, there is no doubt that having American-style free speech can be ugly. Okay, there can be downsides in it, but they are short-term downsides. Okay, when we try to suppress free speech, there's no perfect system out there. But when we try to suppress free speech, it sends it underground. And look, since Elon Musk bought Twitter, okay, if you want to find Holocaust-denying, hardcore, anti-Jewish stuff, it's there on Twitter.
Just go to my comments.
And about 5 months ago, I spent a Sunday afternoon reading. My eyes popped out of bed. I'm reading some of this stuff, and I'm with Avi. You mentioned a few minutes ago that you think it's better to be out there. You're 100% right. I mean, if you read through it, before long you see, look, these people are pretty. They don't have a grip on reality. But it's better that it's out there. Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Totally agree. And I think on that note, we can wrap up this session. Thank you so much, John. Is there any final words? I know I think on the state or federal level, it's pretty much the same stuff. My question to you, but just before you go, the mandatory minimum sentence for terrorism, acts of terror, do you have a problem with that?
Yeah, I do have a problem with that because, look, I think it's a bit broader than like actual acts of terrorism. But I mean, look, we've got.
I'm asking. I'm not looking at that. I was hoping you knew more about the actual legislation that was put. It all rushed so fast that we never even had time to look at it. But do you, in principle, have a problem with a mandatory minimum sentence for terrorists?
Yes. Look, we got to judge all these things, all these circumstances, and each particular crime. There's complexity to it, and there's unique complexity to it, and the judge has to have the power to say, to take in the personal circumstance. So there might, let's say there's a terrorist attack, and let's say there's 5 people involved in it, but the 5th one is who's clearly guilty of some terrorism. They might have been the younger brother of the ringleader, and they might only be 14, and they might just have been swept up in it, and they may not have been a mastermind, but they were there, and they deserve some prison time, no question about it. But we got to give the judge the discretion to say, look, this kid doesn't deserve 30 years in jail, okay? He probably deserves 4 or 5. But under mandatory sentencing, if he's found to be involved in terrorism, well, the judge has no discretion.
This is where we, I think, disagree. As long as I understand one thing you're saying, and the only reason why, to me, I'm I'm having any sympathy to the argument and entertaining it at all is just because of COVID and I saw. So I'm just saying if the police can then argue that something is an act of terror that has nothing to do with terrorism. So in the case of COVID, they suddenly apply in COVID they did apply terrorism legislation to deal with public dissent when it came to opposing the harsh overreaching COVID restrictions. So I am sympathetic to the argument. But in principle, you see, we live in Victoria where we have a massive problem with immigrant gangs and often kids that are out on bail 65 times out on bail. And if there was just a minimum mandatory sentence for violent crimes, they're out on bail 65 times for violent crimes. If there was a minimum mandatory sentence in that case, that kid will not be on the street. There wouldn't be another victim. So I do, in principle, I do believe that we should have minimum mandatory sentences for probably most violent crimes. But I'm saying it has to be. The definition has to be really clear. When we talk about terrorism, it has to be real terrorism and not, you can't argue that people that don't like the local law of the day is an act of terrorism. So people dissenting on, emergency powers, it's not an act of terror, but rather that somebody coming with a jihadi or a Nazi ideology, they love talking about the Nazi side and, not really talking about what's probably a much larger threat in society, the jihadi side. If somebody's coming with that, and I don't care if you're the big brother that's roped your little brother into committing a terrorist attack, I've seen enough terrorism in my life to know that, yes, you may have been roped into by your father, by your brother, by whatever, but you engaged in that act and the outcome for the victim is as bad no matter what your intention or how complicit you were in the organising of it. So I think that there has to be a minimum mandatory sentence. I just think that it has to be defined very, very, very well.
Well, look, it's hard to disagree with anything you just said when you're talking about crimes. I mean, I think that the feds brought in laws, mandatory minimum sentencing for these hate speech laws. Now that's a different thing. That's a problem. That's right.
I agree with you. I just think that judges, the problem is I don't trust judges when it comes to handing out proper sentences.
We have woke judges.
Yeah,
that's woke. Just the truth.
They're gonna think woke. The best of you, and they're gonna think, oh, the poor terrorist, he had a bad life. We have one of the terrorists here. His argument in court was half my family was killed or 50 family members were killed in Gaza, which by definition means 25 of them were terrorists. And so this guy got off light because that was the argument he gave the woke judge. These judges are all woke and they're never going to they're not going to lock them up. So there's no deterrent and there's no protection to the public. So I do think that there is a place for it. I do agree with you that it has to be defined so clearly that there is no way for the state to then abuse it.
Yeah, no, Rukshan's right. I mean, the judiciary is the problem here. It's not the laws, it's the judiciary. You're right. I mean, that case in Melbourne of that kid, he's been out 50 times. He's 12 hours out, he's out again. And another bad crime. Okay, so, I mean, this is just insanity. It's not the law's problem, it's the judge's problem. Whenever the judiciary, we always think of them as the smartest people in society. But, when a society is really sort of at the right-wing end of the spectrum, then the judges go excessively right-wing. And when like today, when the world society has sort of gone too far on the left wing, the judges go even more left wing. The judges sort of follow the mood of the day more than anybody. And I understand where you're coming from with your concerns about mandatory minimum sentencing when you've got judges that aren't applying the law.
Mate, on that note, thank you so much. I've gone a little bit over time, but I thought it was a great conversation. So thanks for jumping in tonight.
Thanks for
Where can people find you, just when people want to find you?
Well, look, Twitter, John Ruddick, at John Ruddick 2, the number 2.
What's Twitter?
We had a good speech today about the great Donald Trump and a few other things. So Twitter's my main forum, but I've got stuff on most platforms.
What's Twitter?
Sorry, X. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, mate.
Okay, guys, good to catch up.
Thanks, mate.
That was a great conversation. I like him. He's just a little
No,
bit
John
wrong.
Ruddick's great.
He's good, but
No,
he
no,
holds.
I agree with him. Maybe I'm a libertarian, maybe I don't know, but I agree with him a lot more sometimes on most things. He's pretty good.
I do agree with
And
you
when
in
it-
principle,
yeah.
but I think sometimes libertarians, to me, so the perfect example in that conversation, guys. We're actually going to move on to the opposition.show and break it down. So it's going to be specifically just for Urban News Plus members. You can call in. We're going to have about 5 minutes because I need to get to publishing this story. So jump on there now and call in if you want, and we'll just unpack what my problem with the libertarians are when it comes to their arguments. I'll talk about it while I'm cancelling all these things. I think that you know, they say you'll say you're a free speech absolutist, right? But then but you're not, because you don't want somebody outside your house. So you do have a line. Everybody has a line. And so the question is, where is that line?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, I've struggled myself. Like I would have thought that I was a free speech absolutist, but you do hit, when you have that worldview, you do hit these roadblocks, and you can't kind of reconcile the two different, you know, like what you would do in that situation. You know, like you said, do you want someone outside of the front of your house? Is that free speech or whatever? Or is it free speech? For instance, some people were making the argument, I saw on the Sky News, that you know, what those nurses were saying was an issue of free speech. Like, some people make that argument that for them to make those threats to kill people is something to do with free speech, and it's not. We always have these boundaries and these limits in society about what we can say and what we can't say, for, you know, because of how it impacts other people. For instance, like you just because of free speech, you can't go around advocating on public streets for you know, to attack children or to sexually abuse children, because that's illegal. Depending on the way that you're saying things. So, you know, there's always been limits on speech. I think the broader question is about just normal conversation, political discussions. You know, just saying that you don't like someone, should that be classified as hate speech? That's the gray areas that we're moving into today, where it's so broad now.